RTV6, Indianapolis This Week.
Welcome and thanks for joining us for Indianapolis This Week. Congressman Luke Messer calls for the repeal of the individual mandate of the Affordable Care Act as open enrollment comes to an end. What's behind the move? And a stunner, Democrat Doug Jones defeats Republican Roy Moore in Alabama for a U.S. Senate seat. Our insiders debate what the impact could be to Indiana's 2018 Senate race. But first, a one-on-one conversation with Governor Eric Holcomb. As 2017 draws to an end, a deadly problem continues to loom over Indiana. That is the opioid epidemic. I asked the governor if state officials know the full scope of the problem. He says they're only seeing the tip of the iceberg.
Actually, I think we're all just seeing the tip of the iceberg. Made a lot of progress over this last year, 2 years, quite frankly, heading in the right direction, but a lot more work to be done. And I think on all three fronts, and there needs to be a balanced approach on the prevention front, treatment and enforcement. We need earlier education. Unfortunately, our young ones are learning about drugs at home. It's not at parties like maybe it used to be. This is seen at firsthand from parents or grandparents or friends at home, and so we have to have a counter narrative to just show how serious this issue is for our young ones, and that's, I believe, elementary, middle, high school, so that there's this early warning system in place. We obviously we need better data. You can't manage what you can't measure, and so we'll be seeking some efforts to make improvement on that front. To make sure that we are not spilling our resources and that we know what is being used where, what these overdose deaths are being attributed to specifically. We need to make sure that there are more treatment programs and centers so that they're closer and that help can be immediately connected to that individual who is reaching out. We need to make sure that being the crossroads of America, that's good for legal commerce, but it's good for illegal commerce as well. And so we'll seek to make it abundantly clear that this is the absolute worst state in America to be peddling and pushing these evil and illegal substances. So a lot of work to be done. We know that we have to work at the most local level on the streets. This is where this is occurring, and the state is seeking to partner in ways like we've never had before to do just what I said, and that's reduce the supply. We had 230 million prescriptions in the system in America last year. That was enough for every American adult for 30 days. So we have to dial that back and make sure that drugs that aren't being used are taken back, and there's a 7-day period that physicians are checking inspect on those first prescriptions. So there are steps that have to be taken, and we are on the right road, but this is a long road ahead, and we're not going to let up for one nanosecond.
That being said, how much can the state do in a non-budget year?
Yeah. Well, our work, a lot of work can be done, and we're spending about $100 million, the state, on this front right now. All said and done, various agencies. We are expecting, obviously, another $10 million in 2018 from the almost $11 million through the CARES Act. We are also right now seeking to get our HIP 2.0 waiver approved, which brings in another 55 to 65 million. All the money in the world won't solve this issue in America, but that doesn't mean that we're not actively and aggressively pursuing more funding that will be used on the ground for treatment centers, for treatment programs, for getting people not just on the road to recovery, but equally important, as I am learning, is keeping someone on that road to recovery.
Do you see Lawrence and Madison County's decision to end their needle exchange programs as a setback in this fight?
No, I don't at all. I think it's giving the local community control to make that decision was my goal. It was that local communities wouldn't have to wait on the state of Indiana to react to something that was acute or was required immediate attention.
Congressman Luke Messer is calling for the repeal of the Affordable Care Act's individual mandate as part of the final tax reform bill. Messer sent a letter to the Tax Cut Bill Conference Committee to push for the repeal. It's already included in the Senate version of the tax reform bill, but it is not in the House plan. Right now, the individual mandate requires people to have health insurance or pay a fine. Messer argues the mandate amounts to a tax on low and middle income Hoosiers. President Trump previously expressed support for repealing the individual mandate. Enrollment on the health insurance marketplace ended on Friday. A major upset in Alabama that could have implications nationally and right here in Indiana. Democrat Doug Jones defeated Republican Roy Moore for the hotly contested U.S. Senate seat. Leading up to the election, Moore faced accusations of sexually assaulting several teen girls decades ago. Our political insiders are in just minutes with how Jones' victory could impact Indiana's 2018 Senate race. It's already expected to be one of the closest in the U.S. They'll also discuss the impact Jones' win could have on President Trump. In February, a former member of the Trump administration will make an appearance in Indiana. Reince Priebus served as White House Chief of Staff for President Trump from January 20th until July 31st of this year. Priebus will speak at the Indiana Chamber's annual dinner in February. He had the shortest tenure of any White House Chief of Staff, serving in a non-interim basis. It's official. Indianapolis Public Schools will have a nearly $1 billion funding request on May's primary ballot in Marion County. The IPS Board of Commissioners unanimously voted to put 2 referenda before Marion County voters in May. If voters approve both, they'll see their property taxes go up. For the owner of a home worth around $125,000, it'd mean an increase of more than $340 per year. The district says it would use that money for capital and operating expenses while also recruiting and retaining better teachers. Indiana's cold beer law won't be changing anytime soon. At least that's what some industry insiders are telling RTV6. They say there's little chance lawmakers will vote on changes. A former state senator who led an alcohol study commission says change isn't likely until voters are heard. The legislature is expected to consider a new Sunday alcohol sales bill next year, and what seems to be the best chance for it to pass. The FCC voted on a controversial plan to repeal net neutrality rules. The decision means internet providers won't be forced to treat all web traffic equally, as was the case with net neutrality regulations. Some Republicans say those rules hurt the free market when it comes to internet business, but Democrats are criticizing the move. They say it plays into the hands of internet providers who could now force websites to pay to get preferential treatment.
The public can plainly see that a soon-to-be toothless FCC is handing the keys to the internet over to a handful of multi-billion-dollar corporations.
This decision will not break the internet. What we are doing is reverting back to the highly successful, bipartisan, governmental approach that existed before 2015.
Officials say it could be months before the rollback on net neutrality takes effect. Senator Joe Donnelly released this statement about the FCC's vote to repeal net neutrality rules. He says the internet is critical to Indiana and our country's economy and a vital tool for communication, innovation, and research. This decision could threaten an open internet and harm entrepreneurs and small businesses, as well as consumers' ability to access the content of their choice. Our insiders are in next after the break. How Jones's Senate victory in Alabama could impact the race here in Indiana next year. And Congressman Messer calls to repeal the individual mandates in the Affordable Care Act. Plus, the larger impact from the repeal of net neutrality regulations.
Weekdays at 9 on RTV6.
Welcome back. Our political insiders are here with us today. Conservative Abdul Hakim Shabazz, Democrat Laura Beck, and Mary Beth Schneider, formerly of the Indianapolis Star. The Alabama Senate race, what impact could this outcome have on Indiana's U.S. Senate race next year?
I think a lot less of an impact than had Roy Moore won. There were probably a lot of Republicans who were thanking God, Jesus, Allah, Buddha, you name it, on that Tuesday night when that special election was over, because the last thing any of these guys wanted was to see Roy Moore in front of an ethics committee and his accusers all going before explaining in graphic detail what they allege he did to them, because that would not be good for any of those guys. First of all, it's not good, period, much less from a political perspective. So I think they're all hanging out with, I think everybody that night was hanging out with 14-year-olds, except it was Scotch, not literal 14-year-olds.
I just have no idea what you just said. Okay, whatever. I think what I think is interesting about this, especially from the Democrat perspective, is it was, yes, a very good victory for our party. At the same time, there were some flashbacks to 2012 with Indiana and Richard Murdoch and Joe Donnelly, especially when you got into some of the discussions that had happened over that time and how they ensued. But I really feel like for the Democrats, we can be confident, but we can't be cocky. And I think that a lot of people are going into the voting booth and they're thinking about Donald Trump. And so some of this is a referendum on him. But at the same time, when you look at states like Virginia, what happened in Virginia, for example, that turned blue. They kept the governor's mansion, which is, we weren't really expecting that to happen. Now Alabama, there is that referendum, but we still have to make sure that we're really talking about those kitchen table issues and we're not veering away from those.
Yeah, I agree with both of them. I mean, yeah, it would have been worse for Republicans if he had won, which is bizarre, but that's the way it is. And Democrats, this is still going to be a difficult race for Joe Donnelly. I think that this gives them hope that there's a national tide coming, but it's a long time till next November. A lot remains to be seen, including who wins the GOP primary.
Yeah, but I do think, though, this does give a path, or at least spells out a bit of a roadmap for someone like a Joe Donnelly. Because if you look at what happened in Alabama, they did focus heavily on just good old-fashioned ground game, turning out that African-American vote, and also being more appealing to what I call, those quote-unquote caramel housewives, those Lugar Republican suburbanites that either stayed home and didn't vote for Roy Moore, or they wrote in the 25,000 votes that wrote in for somebody else. I mean, that's your formula if you're somebody like a Joe Donnelly.
The other thing, though, we cannot also discount is that we're going to go through a very bruising primary between Todd Rokita and Luke Messer.
And don't forget Mike Braun.
And Mike Braun, thank you. And who knows if Steve Bannon comes to town. And so when you go through a primary like that, you are automatically at a disadvantage the minute you walk out of that primary, because you've spent a lot of money, you've spent a lot of political capital, and your name's been dragged in the mud by members of your own party for 5, 6, 7 months. So Joe Donnelly, in the meantime, is going to be able to continue reinforcing the bipartisan brand that he has developed and his reputation. And so I think it's going to be challenging for them when they come out of it.
Abdul, Roy Moore's defeat, good or bad for the president, or not a big impact here?
It doesn't help, because now in Alabama he's 0 for 2. He backed Luther Strange, who lost, then he backed Roy Moore, who lost, and then the president tried to do some weird, Star Wars Jedi mind trick jujitsu. Well, I knew Roy Moore was going to lose all the time. That's why I backed Luther Strange. Whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't help. And some please note too, the president's approval ratings in Alabama were only at 48%. So he was already underwater going in. So I think any place where the president's approval ratings are under 50, he may not necessarily help.
Which is a lot of places. That's everywhere.
I don't think he helps you. And matter of fact, actually, I'll go a step further. He's almost kind of got Barack Obama syndrome. His supporters will come out for him, but maybe not necessarily for other Republicans.
Well, the other challenge too, I think, that you have with Trump is that Trump cannot stay out of the headlines. If he is not in the news for a couple of days, or he hasn't sent an inflammatory tweet, he's got to put himself out there. And so for some of the more moderate Republicans, like a Corker or a Flake or some of those folks, what he essentially doing is he's sort of removing some of his power. And so I think he's going to actually, by doing that, make it easier for some of these moderates to stand up to him.
Yeah, it was there was no upside here for Donald Trump. He backed 2 losing horses, and while it was good for Republicans generally, it was bad for anything that he wants to get through Congress, the president, because now you're down to 51-49. They can only afford to lose 1 person now.
Net neutrality, what could be the impact here? Good news, bad news?
Rumors of net neutrality's horribleness or greatness are both grossly exaggerated. I spoke to a lot of folks over the past few days, and everybody says this will be good for innovation. Your internet providers aren't going to start shutting off your websites or slowing down your traffic. And believe it or not, the internet actually, net neutrality didn't exist until about 2012, 2015 anyway. And for some reason, the internet seemed to work, just fine. It's almost kind of like Y2K. We just all freak out over a bunch of stuff, and everybody's an IT computer expert these days.
I don't know enough about what to expect to have a real informed position, but it concerns me that I do think that big companies will have a much easier ability to dominate, and it'll be harder for startups.
Anytime you put the power in the hands of a few, it doesn't help everyone else. And so I think that just goes to it was surprising to see the president go in that direction, because it really goes against his whole "the system is rigged" mentality.
But so, IndyPolitics.org will always be open.
Well, wait until you get hit. Wait until you get hit.
IndyPolitics.org will always be open and transparent for anybody who wants to take advantage of it.
We'll see.
A little bit of shameless self-promotion there for the holidays from Abdul.
Well, thank you all for your insight. Up next, a local mother urgently trying to change state law to give her kids a chance at survival. What she says this state is missing, a test at birth that could change everything for some newborns.
It's that easy. Call 1-800-CALL-KEN.
A central Indiana mother is pushing for a change in state law to give children like her son the best chance at survival. Adrienne Vollmer's 2-year-old son Graham lives with spinal muscular atrophy. The rare disease is damaging the nerve cells in his spinal cord, leading to muscle loss. There's no cure, but since Graham's diagnosis, the FDA has approved a treatment for the condition. Vollmer plans to ask state lawmakers to add SMA to newborn screenings. She thinks an early diagnosis could have made a difference in her son's life.
Before he would have lost the ability to, move his arms and his legs, or would have lost his swallow, or, would have had just like the impact on his breathing that he has, he could have started a treatment early.
Vollmer is working with Representative Gutwein on a bill for the 2018 legislative session. Indiana currently screens newborns for 47 different conditions. It's a new plan to make major improvements in neighborhoods across Indianapolis. Mayor Joe Hogsett and the Indianapolis Department of Public Works are launching a fund matching program for organizations that want to share the cost of improvements. The Indy Neighborhood Infrastructure Partnership will award nonprofit organizations with matching funds for things like sidewalks, street resurfacing, walking paths, and bridges. The Department of Public Works is accepting proposals for 2018 projects under the Matching Fund Award program. An online training software company says it will expand its Indy headquarters and double the size of its workforce. Governor Holcomb joined executives with Lessonly to announce plans to add about 100 new jobs by 2020. Lessonly officials say they plan to invest about $2 million in their Indianapolis operations over the next 5 years. Bankers Life Fieldhouse will be the site of the NBA All-Star Game in 2021. League and city leaders made the official announcement last week. Even if you're not a basketball fan, Mayor Hogsett says the event will bring more than $100 million to Indianapolis.
That's why this is more than just good news to sports fans. Because just as the players display their talents, Indianapolis will be ready to showcase our second-to-none hospitality, our venues, and our amenities.
The announcement means that Indianapolis will host the All-Star Game and the NCAA Men's Final Four within 3 months of each other. Join our conversation. Check out Indy This Week on Twitter and be sure to like the RTV6 Facebook page. Up ahead, we're looking at the 6 things you need to know for this week. Lauren Casey is in with the 6 next.
Cool things down. Welcome back to Indianapolis This Week. I'm Lauren Casey. It's time for the 6, so let's take a look at 6 things coming up this week in Indy. Start your week off with the sounds of the season. Carols-a-Palooza is coming to Avon tonight. You can enjoy the musical talents of C4, the Circle City Chamber Choir. That show starts at 7 o'clock at Avon Christian Church tonight. Grab the family, take a stroll through Conner Prairie by candlelight. The 90-minute walk will take you back to the 1800s in Prairie Town, where it was the night before Christmas. Those tours begin in the evenings at 6 o'clock. And speaking of the night before Christmas, 'twas the night before Christmas at the Benjamin Harrison Presidential Site. This historic home is hosting several theatrical performances of folklore that you can enjoy. You can stop by that home today between 2 and 5 p.m. The Nutcracker Ballet is the perfect show for the holidays, and you do have a few chances to see it live here in downtown Indy. This weekend, you can see the Ballet Theater of Indiana's performances on the Mass Ave Theater there. You can also see the Indianapolis Ballet take the stage at the Old National Center. Well, need a laugh? Indy Fringe wants you to see their show, Christmas Through the Ages. You can swing by the Indy 11 Theater this weekend at 7 o'clock to witness hysterically historical holiday musical. Plus, do you miss those farm fresh goods that remind you of much warmer days? Well, you can head to the Broad Ripple Winter Market on Saturday from 9 until noon. That's what's on tap this week in Indy. Back to you.
Thanks, Lauren, and thank you for joining us for Indianapolis This Week. Have a great Sunday. We'll see you at the same time next week.